Good afternoon, Saints. Can we turn please to the book of Nahum first of all? Nahum and chapter 1. And we'll try and finish around 25 past. That'll give us time for a hymn. Then 45 minutes of Brother Craig. We'll be with Craig and with Robert again. Nahum chapter 1. And verse 1 of the first chapter, the burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth, or a jealous and avenging God is Jehovah. Verse 3, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. And verse 7, the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows them that trust in him. Just notice that verse. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble or the day of distress, and he knows them that trust in him. Lamentations, please, in chapter 3. Lamentations in chapter 3. In between Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you'll find Lamentations, and the middle of the book, the central part of the book, and we find Jeremiah in deep distress. In the end of, or in verse 18 of chapter 3, Jeremiah says, my strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Verse 21, he says, this I recall in my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, or the Lord's mercies never cease. His compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. And back to Psalm 34, please, for a final reading, Psalm 34. And we have David, of course, when he changed his behavior before Abimelech, before Achish, who drove him away, and he departed. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make her boast in the Lord, and the humble shall hear thereof and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me from all my fears. They looked unto him and were lightened. Their faces were not ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him, and saved them out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encampeth around about them that fear him, and delivereth them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusts in him. O fear the Lord, ye saints, for there is no want to them that fear him. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they that seek the Lord shall not want any good thing. And verse 8 is really where I want to focus our attention. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusts in him. We give thanks to God for his good word today. It has been something of a meditation of mine the past week or so. Something of what it means when we speak of the goodness of the Lord. And a book that I read many years ago and have reread several times opens with this line. What comes into our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about it. It's the first line of The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer. And the further I've gone in the Christian pathway, the more I think I've come to understand this truth, if not many others that I should have learned more of. That how we live and how we behave and what we do every day has a strong derivation to our thoughts of God. The higher our thoughts of God, the better our life. The lower, very quickly our life falls. That's what happens in Eden, of course, isn't it? That's the record of Eve. Before she took the fruit and reached forth to sin in that explicit way, she had entertained unworthy thoughts of the Lord. She had begun to believe that he was not the giver that he said he was, that he didn't have the best for her in his plans and in his action. And that stood behind her reaching out for the fruit and believing the lies. So when we think about God, what we think about God really matters. Now, when we say the phrase, the Lord is good, what are we thinking about? We've read it 3 times in Nahum and Lamentations and in Psalm 34. The Lord is good. Now, it doesn't really mean his righteousness, or it's not really righteousness, although, of course, the Lord is righteous. He always does what is right. He is holy. Everything he does comes perfect and issues forth perfectly. But you remember in Mark 10, that the Lord responded to that question by saying there is no one good except God alone, which gets to the point that this is something intrinsic about God. This is inherent in his nature. When we speak of God and we speak of his goodness, we are describing something that he is, and therefore that which issues into what he gives and what he provides. I think you get a greater understanding of it when you come to Exodus 33 and 34. I didn't take you there just because we'd already been in 3 passages. But remember that Moses asked to see the glory of the Lord. Show me thy glory. The Lord said that he would cause his goodness to pass before him and to proclaim his name. And those 2 things are put together. The name of the Lord, that which summarizes who he is, the very fullness of his character, and the goodness of the Lord. When we speak of the Lord being good, of Jehovah's goodness, we are speaking of his disposition, his character, who he is. Now, for all the believers who are listening today, and I'm very aware there's probably a lot more on this little machine than there is in the hall, but I just want to get this into your minds and souls to take away today. The need for the unshakable confidence in the life of God's people, of the fact that the Lord is good. There's very many circumstances that you will come into in life where you will need to know, when you can't see, you will need to know that the Lord is good. If you follow through in Exodus 34, when Moses, of course, is given some understanding of the goodness and the name of the Lord, there are 7 things mentioned that flow from his name and his goodness. 7 things. I won't go into them, but I'll just list them for you. Mercy, grace, long-suffering. The one in the middle is mentioned twice. You might think it's especially important, and it is. His steadfast love. Truth or faithfulness. Forgiveness of sins. And justice, the one who will not by any means acquit the guilty. All of that flows from the goodness of God. And what I want to do today as we go through these 3 sections quickly is just to show you how all of this flows out into some of the most difficult experiences of God's people. You see, if you follow that phrase, the Lord is good, or God is good, or the Lord, He is good, usually followed by His loving kindness, His steadfast love endures forever. I'm smiling because very often that's what we quote at the table before we give thanks. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Very often that statement is made in some of the heights of joy of God's people. They are linked with psalms of rejoicing and exultation. When days are fabulous, when the foundation of the temple is laid, when Solomon's temple is complete, when Jeremiah is promised in chapter 33 that they're coming back to this place. And despite all that you see now, they're going to come back, and in this place they will declare, the Lord is good. It's linked so often with days of happiness and joy. And it may well be that as you think about the goodness of the Lord, you think about good occasion. You see, really, if you were to summarize what the goodness of the Lord is, define it. It is His attitude and disposition towards us, of bounty, of blessing, of goodwill, that He is toward us and for us. That means there is mercy, and there is grace, and there is long suffering, and there is faithfulness, and there is steadfast love, and so on. All poured out because of His bountiful goodwill disposition towards us. And in the happy days, you know, when someone gets saved, how often do you hear it? The Lord is good. And that's absolutely right, isn't it? An expression of the goodness of God in the forgiveness of sins and iniquities. And when a way opens up you never thought would open up. I'm speaking to a whole lot of young folks. Maybe that young lady that is a Christian that you've longed to get close to and perhaps would be your wife one day, and then she accepts your invitation to marry you. You might well say the Lord is good. But we've read of 3 occasions that are quite different. And that's what I want to focus, because I was in a prayer meeting in the last couple of weeks and praying for some saints in real difficulties and going through real valleys. And one of the brothers said this, and it's been in my mind ever since he said it. He said that sometimes the Lord is good as a statement of faith. When things are obviously great, it's always a statement of fact that the Lord is good. But when things are obviously great, then it's even more obvious a statement of fact, but sometimes a statement of faith. And I want you to take away today just these 3 occasions, Psalm 34, Lamentations 3, and Nehemiah 1. And see how God's people find that the Lord is good in real difficulties. Now we're going to start in Psalm 34. We'll see how we get on time-wise. And I'll be doing some pretty high-level exposition today. But you come to Psalm 34, and David's made a mess. I'm going to call it the day of disgrace. I don't know what else we could call it. It's disgrace. He has run from Saul, fearful. He's come to Nob, and he's made a mess. He's told lies that eventually will kill a large number of priests, and he brings a whole lot of difficulty in among God's people by his words. To make it worse, he flees down to Gath, taking Goliath's sword with him, and of course then to get out of his hole, as Psalm 34, the heading tells us, he changes behavior before Abimelech. He feigned the madman. This is the king, the anointed king, anointed to be king, feigning madness before Egypt. There's no other word for it but disgrace. He sinned badly. Maybe some of you know what that's like. And I can tell you that the preacher right now knows what that's like. And the only word you can put upon it is disgrace. But he's been taken to the cave, and the Lord has been good to him. And his relatives have come, his family's come. And the Lord's given him men that came to him from all parts. And suddenly, from his fear and his failure, he has fellowship and he has encouragement. And he sits down to write a psalm. Now, some of the Psalms of David are, you can imagine them being penned with they just come straight from the heart. And they are cries of anguish or delight. But this one's an acrostic psalm. It is 22 verses, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. He has sat down and constructed this under the guidance of the Spirit of God, of course, to tell us about how good the Lord is to his people when they're in disgrace, when they fail. Right at the center of the psalm is well, there are three statements you'll see in verse 3, oh, and verse 8, oh, and verse 9, oh. And there are three encouragement statements in the Hebrew. They are imperative statements, or things that you must do. David says, in my experience, I want to encourage you, and you need to do this because of what I have come to experience of God. The first 10 verses are a song that he writes, and then the remaining from verse 11 onwards are a sermon. You'll see he says, come, verse 11, ye children, hearken to me, I will teach you. He wants to teach them the fear of the Lord. I don't want to go into this for the sake of time. His problem, his difficulty, what he failed at particularly was the fear of man. You can trace that through fear of Saul, fear of Achish, there's the fear of man. Peter takes up Psalm 34. It's in the background of his mind as he writes 1 Peter, because he quotes it and refers to it several times. And the great issue of who you fear and what you fear. I nearly took that up today. I ended up here. Okay. The sin, and it's one of the sins that keeps getting repeated. There are sins that keep getting repeated in the Bible, right? You better watch for them. Young people particularly, watch for them because they keep coming up. Pride in the heart. It keeps coming up. Be careful of pride. The fear of man keeps coming up. The repeated exhortations of God's people not to fear man. The sin that's linked with sexual passions keeps coming up. Look at the sins that keep coming up in the Bible and ask God for help to avoid them. But without going into details here, the fear of man is the background and is the issue. And he come to realize that actually he has to fear the Lord. When you fear the Lord, everyone else fades away. By the way, some of God's best people have failed in this whole area. Peter and Barnabas being one of them in Galatians 2, of course. The fear of man is really easy, to live your life under the oppressive fear of men, even your brother. So David says, fear the Lord. But in these three statements, he says, oh, magnify the Lord with you. You must help me extol his name and make him great. Make him conspicuous. And then the third one in verse 9, oh, fear the Lord. This is climactic in its statement of intent in the psalm. You must fear the Lord. But the middle one in verse 8 is where I want to focus our attention. He says, oh, taste and see the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusts in him. Now what did David come to understand? Well, he tells us, verse 6, he cried to the Lord. And the goodness of the Lord is seen in several aspects in this psalm. I want to just mention three of them. To those that have failed and in disgrace, the first is this, that he's with them. His presence is much to David's delight. In all of this disaster, the presence of the Lord is there. Look at verse 7. The angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him. But look at verse 17. The righteous cry, the Lord hears and delivers them. Verse 18. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such that are be of a contrite spirit. He says, I cried in all my failure, and the Lord was there. He was right there. It's the goodness of God. You go further. It's kind of been mentioned already in the text we've read. But his ear is open towards them. Look at verse 4. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me out of all my fears. Verse 6, this poor man cried, and the Lord heard him. He heard. Here's David in all his failure. Made an absolute mess. The Lord's with him. The Lord draws near. The Lord hears. But climactically, look at verse 15, and this is what Peter takes up, of course, in his epistle. The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous. His ears are open to their cry. The face of the Lord is against them that do evil. The face of the Lord and the eyes of the Lord were upon him. I just stop for a second. This is what I want to make sure you get from Psalm 30. You see, verse 8 says this, taste and see. David says, I've been here and I want you to join me and understand this. Taste and see that the Lord is good. You know, it'd be very surprising for me in a meeting like this if there was not a number of God's people who are in need of restoration from sin and failure. It would be an astonishing thing if it was not the case. Listen to the words of David today. He says, taste and see that the Lord is good. He is towards you. His face is towards you. See, this is the very definition of blessedness. Look at verse 8. Blessed is the man that trusts in him. And this is the position of God's people. You are those that trust in him. Therefore, you are blessed. You are in the position of blessedness. It's the Asher word where Leah named that child Asher from. It is that position. It's a position idea of happy, delighted, promoted place. The place where God's face is towards us. Christian, there's no place like it. I mean, the alternative, as you see in verse 16, is the face of the Lord against them. See, this is whenever you see the idea of blessing and cursing, right? This is the key idea. What it means to be blessed and what it means to be cursed. You get that from of course, the priestly benediction, because in Hebrew parallel thought there are repeated ideas that help us understand what it means to be blessed of the Lord. To be blessed is to have the face of God shine upon us and to have his countenance lifted upon us. See, Christian, the day you got saved, you came to a place of blessing that you're never moving from. And it can never change. You might find yourself in something of the disaster and the failure of Psalm 34. And many of God's people have. And let's be absolutely clear, the Lord hates sin. He's absolutely righteous. But because of the cross, his face is towards you. And I don't just speak for myself. I speak for many in the room, I'm sure, and many online when I say this. I am so glad that when God's people fall, that the Lord is good and his face is towards them. David found it. He found it in the disaster of his failure. The Lord is good. The reason that we're in the place of blessing, of course, is because he became Did you notice that? It's not that he just took a curse for us, or took the curse for us. He became a curse. He went to the place where the face was turned away. He went to the place of darkness. And God shrouded the whole of the earth in darkness to reflect the awfulness of that moment, of those hours. It means, Christian, that on the other side, as those that are the righteous, his face is towards you. If you're in the place of disgrace today, lift up your head. Cry unto the Lord. You know, there's many times when God's people go to the place of failure, they don't lift their head up and cry because their thoughts of God and his willingness to hear them are not the thoughts of David in Psalm 34. Be quick to confess. Be quick to repent. Be quick to turn. Because, Christian, God's face is towards you. The Lord is good. Let's go to Nahum chapter 1. And we'll think about a couple of verses there. Some of you had difficulty finding a name the first time, and I'll maybe go back to it a second time. But I'll give you some time to find it. Nahum chapter 1. And we find not a day of disgrace, but a day of distress. That's what verse 7 tells us. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. It's the word distress. There is a climate of fear hanging over God's people. There is opposition from the outside. This is the sequel, of course, to the book of Jonah. It's 100 plus years later. Nineveh, Assyria has long since kicked off its repentance and is banging down the door of Judah, having taken away the 10 tribes. And is, Rabshakeh, of course, sent to cause chaos and fear among the people of God. And it is an external pressure, world power. This is the superpower of the day, okay? Oppressing God's people. And God's people are under the cosh and under the powerful, dominant oversight of a wicked enemy. Okay? It's pretty bad. Nahum is written, it's all about Assyria, no, but it's to Judah. Okay? It's to Judah. It's for God's people. God's people are to know, and it gets pretty serious pretty quickly, that there's judgment coming. It's a burden, verse 1, the burden of Nineveh. There is a heavy weight of judgment coming from the Lord, and it's going to land. Okay? It's going to land on Nineveh and Assyria. But whilst this is a burden of Nineveh, it comes as a comfort to God's people. In fact, Nahum's name means comfort. Okay? It is a word of comfort to the people of God. And they are to know. Well, what do they need to know? What do they need to know? See, in disgrace, what you need is good theology. You need to understand God and who God is. Or you won't know where to turn. That's what we spent the last 20 minutes doing. Okay? So that if you're not in that place today, but you find yourself there tomorrow, you know who God is. And you know how to turn. And you know how to come. This poor man cried. Well, when there's oppression from the outside, you ever think that's the case? You know, when I was young in conferences like this, the brethren used to tell me, brethren like Robert and others, told us that persecution is coming in our land. I'm not sure if we believed them at the time, but I think you would be forgiven for thinking that it is. I think it's warming up that way, isn't it? And the young people in the room today, and those of you who are trying to make your way in the world and trying to progress and trying to build maybe a career or raise a family, you'll understand this, that things are getting difficult and they're likely to get hard. But that's okay. God's people have faced harder before. Okay? And we were never promised it would be smooth, were we? Right? So we need not to go soft. all right? And just bleat about things. Because you don't have Rab Shaky at your city gate threatening to take your heads off, do you? No. So it's bad, but it could be worse. And God's people have faced much worse in Ephesus and Corinth and so on before. So lift up your head, okay? There's oppression. But what God's people need to know is the theology of who God is. And you have a series of statements that are given to us in Nahum chapter 1. And a series of these statements that are given with a climactic statement, verse 7, the Lord is good. All right, this is where this first section flows through. And these are the elements of the goodness of God when they are in a day of distress now. What do they need to know? Well, first of all, the Lord is jealous. Isn't that good? Now, there are many things you say and you get amens for. You don't tend to get an amen for the Lord is jealous. But that's because we don't like the term. And it's understandable because when we're jealous, jealousy is the idea of passionately defending your rights. What is yours, you won't let go of. And for us, that's very often sin. Not always, but very often sin. For God, it never is. It's absolutely right, and it's glorious, and it's wonderful. So when I say the Lord is jealous, you ought to say, amen, right? Because that's who he is. Now, you see, and the best example, of course, of this is when a husband and wife, when someone tries to come into that relationship and to take away the spouse, you think it is absolutely right that the husband or wife is jealous. Because they belong to them. They belong to them. Now here's the thing, Christian. In all the oppression and difficulty, and I made a little bit of light of it a few minutes ago, I didn't mean to, I was just trying to get your attention. But things can be hard, right? When you're getting persecuted at university or at work, when you refuse to take the stand with the people of the day and you end up being called and labeled all sorts, it's not fun, right? And there are hard paths to walk and there are hard decisions to take. And it's not going to be easy. You know this, the Lord is jealous for his people. Those that touch God's people, there's a day of recompense coming. And that's the exact series it's twinned with. The Lord is jealous and the Lord avenges. You see, Romans 12, what's our rule? We are to love our enemies. We are to do good to our enemies. Vengeance is mine, the Lord says. I will repay. Now, you see, it's not your role to stand up and fight them. It's not your role to take vengeance on them. You leave that to God. And all the difficulties, and when it gets hard and oppressive, and when the pressures are on, remember this. The Lord is jealous, and the Lord avenges. Vengeance, of course, is a category of justice. There is recompense for what they do. And that's part of the goodness of God. It's number 7 in the list in Exodus 34. He will by no means acquit the guilty. You might not like that with the goodness of God, but it absolutely is. Goodness of God that will not pass by sin. He is jealous, he avenges, but look at the language of verse 3. The Lord is slow to anger. He's long-suffering. Same word as Exodus 34. He's long-suffering. The long-suffering goodness of God. Aren't you glad for the long-suffering of God? And as you go out in the gospel and seek to see folks saved, aren't you glad for the long-suffering of God? He forgives sins and iniquities. Nineveh have been at this for a long time. He sent them a preacher before. He wasn't a great preacher, but he saw a lot of people turn. and he's given them a lot of room, because the Lord's long-suffering. But don't mistake God's long-suffering for his impotence, because you see from that verse 3 statement onwards, great in power, will not at all acquit the wicked. And you come right down this section, you have this, the Lord coming as a whirlwind in judgment and mighty power. He is patient, but he is absolutely proficient in judgment. He's coming. This world is heading for him. May the Lord save many before he comes in judgment. And it climaxes in verse 7. The Lord is good. The Lord is good, a stronghold, a fortress in the day of distress. And I may be speaking to people, and in your lifetime, you will lose jobs. You will lose wealth. You will lose a reputation for the name of Christ. In this country, a day of distress, and there will be tears and difficulties, and it will not be easy. You need to know this. The Lord is good. He's towards you, Christian. He's not abandoned you. He's towards you. He's a fortress in the day of distress. But look at the end of that verse. He knows them that trust in him. Everyone that trusts him, he knows them. He sees them. He appreciates them. He values them. You know, I think it's an astonishing thing in John 17 when the 11 are there with the Lord, and he is speaking to God in that remarkable prayer. What does he say about these 11? You might have said many things about them. The very simple thing that he says about them, I think, is most beautiful. In a world of unbelief, in a world of those who didn't trust in him, these have belief. You know, it's a wonderful thing to get hold of this, that the simplicity of faith means a lot to God. And in all your weakness and all your smallness, trying to go on, walk day by day, trusting him, the Lord values it. And the Lord is good. And the Lord is jealous. Now quickly, let's just go to Lamentations 3 to finish. What do you say about Lamentations 3? Not a day of disgrace or a day of distress, but it's a day of despair. There's hardly another way to describe that when you come to verse 18. Lamentations, of course, is a book of despair. In some respects, it's national despair. It's the city is ruined and Jerusalem has gone. And it used to be so glorious, and the sin of the people and the judgment of God has meant disaster. And Jeremiah is in the ashes of it all. But Lamentations concertinas around chapter 3 because chapter 3 is the climax. Again, it's acrostic. This is actually chapter 3 is a triple acrostic in Hebrew. 66 verses, 3 times the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It is climactic of all the other acrostic sections, and it is deliberately the focus. The whole book swings on this part. Our brother John Grant, who went to glory, used to call it the fulcrum book. Everything pivots on it. But chapter 3 is deeply personal. And you see Jeremiah. If you ever feel sorry for yourself, right? Okay, just go and read the life of Jeremiah, and that'll just make you feel better. What a life! What a call he was given, and what a work he had to do. His life overflowed with tears. By the way, remember, he was a bit of a foreshadowing of our Lord. That's why when he asked the question, "Whom do men say that I am?" some came back and said Jeremiah. Who in all his righteousness was there with the people, and heartbroken at the sin and the failure of the nation. You see, this is deeply personal. You come down this section. He feels, look at verse 1, he feels under the discipline of God personally, the rod of his wrath. Verse 3, he feels like he's being repeatedly beaten. His health in verse 4 seems to be gone. His flesh and his skin made old. Verse 8, he feels like his cry is shut out. He's crying and he feels like he's not heard. In verse 10, he feels like he's oppressed by predators hunting him like a bear or a lion. Verse 12 and 13, he describes being shot at by the Lord. He's bent his bow and his arrow, and he's fired his arrow into his reins, into his kidneys. Verse 14, he's derided by the people. My people deride me all the day long. He comes down in verse 15, he feels like he's being poisoned with wormwood and bitterness. His pain is like chewing on gravel, verse 16. Broken with gravel stones and covered with hot ashes. He's forgotten, verse 17, what peace and prosperity ever felt like. Some of you have never been there, but you might be there. Comes to the point in verse 18 where all strength and hope is gone. It's complete despair. It's I judge one of the best of God's servants. He's completely broken. But what's the way out? Or should I say, what's the way through? It's verse 21. This I recall in my mind. Therefore have I hope. What do you need to understand in his despair? Well, again, it's theology, people. Okay, you need to learn about God. That's why the Bible teaches us so much about him. Okay, it all starts with him. To know who he is. Because sometimes, as our brother said there in prayer, I was referring to a couple of weeks ago, sometimes the Lord is good as a statement of faith. This is it. And he outlines something of the character of God, climaxing in verse 25. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, the soul that seeks him. I don't have time, just very, very quickly. His steadfast love never ceases. That's a better translation, I believe, verse 22. Again, you're in Exodus 34. Abundant in steadfast love. It's the hesed love of God, the loyal love of God, the commitment, passion of God for his people. And Jeremiah in the dust couldn't see anything. His only hope was this. That the Lord, his steadfast love never ceases. His compassions, his mercies, they never fail. They roll on you every day. There's not a day, Christian, goes by, but the Lord's face is towards you and he's merciful. His compassions never end. His faithfulness, again, is the word from Exodus 34 for truth, abundant in steadfast love and faithfulness. This is the goodness of God. He says, the Lord is my portion, therefore will I hope. The Lord is good. Notice, unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. You know, sometimes we like the miracle, joyful stories of the waves parting. That's good, isn't it? I love Exodus. You like that too, you know, where you're all shut in and there's no way out, the Lord opens a way. And he is the God that opens, that makes a way where there is no way. Sometimes the way through is long, it's hard. The sun doesn't shine for a long time. But the way through is this. The Lord is good. To them that wait for him. May the Lord spare you from some of the excesses of despair and difficulty that Jeremiah ended up in. Some people have life and difficulties that are very, very hard. Jeremiah teaches us that the way through it is to understand that the Lord is good. In disgrace and in despair and in distress, the Lord is good to his people. May the Lord bless his word to us today.